Hello and welcome to week 3 of American History Hybrid with Mr. Bidwell. We're looking at chapter 16. This week we're going to take a look at new immigrants and the changing of the urban landscape within American cities. And again, this is a unit um, this week will be divided into two different sections. So the culmination of this unit will take place after winter break. So let's get started. Here we have the content objectives. First, explain how immigration changed in the late 1800s. Secondly, describe the challenges immigrants face as they settled in the United States. Third, discuss where new immigrants found assistance. Four, describe the reasons why nativists opposed new immigrants. Fifth, analyze how technological innovation altered the urban landscape. Six, identify and explain the new wealthy class, the middle class, and the poor city dwellers. 7. Describe how compulsory education changed society, industrial areas, and regions of the U.S. And lastly, explain how new forms of entertainment altered the American life in the late 1800s. Again, at the end of the notes, go ahead and come back to these 8 content objectives and make sure that you can thoroughly answer them with historical facts. Let's get started. Section 1 is talking about the new immigrants. First, let's talk about the lure of America. America is going to be an economic pull factor. Prior to the new immigrants, there were old immigrants. They comprised northwestern regions of Europe. Specifically in the 1840s, the Germans came across, followed by the Irish. As you learned in AP Human Geography, the Germans came across because of political push factors, and the Irish came across because of environmental push factors, the potato famine. With the arrival of the new immigrants in the late 1800s, 1890s and on, we're looking at immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe, specifically countries such as Poland, Russia, and Italian make up the largest immigrant groups, but there are other immigrant groups such as the Czechs, the Greeks, and the Jews that come across as well. The main reason for these are economic pull factors, but there are some persecution factors, such as the Jews, which again is going back to the diaspora. When we look at these new immigrants, they're going to come by way of ship, and the front part of the ship, which is known as the steerage, that's going to be a compact compartment, very uncomfortable. The journey is going to be long, and with the long journey, they again experience many health issues such as being cramped. Some will contract diseases, respiratory diseases, because of poor ventilation. They'll arrive at 2 entry points by ship in the U.S. The 2 entry points, the largest being Ellis Island. That's going to be right off of in New York. Ellis Island is going to be where most of the immigrants come across. When they come across, they'll endure a physical, a long examination process. It'll be in long lines, and when they come through the lines, they're going to be subjected not only to physical examinations, but more specifically looking for contagious diseases such as tuberculosis and other bacterial and viral diseases. And very few were turned back. They did turn back criminals and those that had severe diseases, as I've aforementioned. The second entry point is going to be Angel Island. Angel Island is going to be located right in San Francisco. That is going to be where we'll see most of our Asian immigrants as they make their way across the United States. During this time, there are going to be strict laws. They faced strict immigration laws. They limited entry to only skilled workers and individuals that had families here. As you go back to AP Human Geography, you learned about chain migration. That's again arriving to the area or to America by way of family already being here. When they come across this new life, they're going to be crowded in ethnic neighborhoods where they have similar languages, similar customs, similar cultures, and they're going to be crowded and known as ethnic neighborhoods. Which brings us to these individual communities. They brought safety. They brought commonality amongst the low-paying, unskilled job force that crowded in cities. They also brought familiarity with their old customs that they from their previous country they came from, and they also provided an opportunity for networking and communication. Within these ethnic neighborhoods, they also provided religious institutions. That way they could maintain their sense of identity and belonging, again, going back to their core beliefs and values. The churches also offered daycare for children, gymnasiums, reading rooms, and also sewing rooms, social clubs, and training courses. So again, there's social development that was encouraged in these religious institutions as well. The religious institutions also are going to be known as benevolent societies. Benevolent societies will help cater to people with sicknesses or that are unemployed or experiencing the latter stages of life. And this is a main social institution for the newly arriving immigrants. And most immigrant work was the dirty work, low-paying jobs in um, poor ventilated areas in the workplace. And not only that, but they worked long hours and their wages were very low. With that comes the rise of the nativists. So we have an influx of immigrants coming across with the new immigrants, and the nativist approach will target the new immigrants for any social problems such as crime, poverty, or violence, and then blaming these radical political ideas where we'll see a rise in a nativist revolt. Um, they achieved most of their success in the West with the Chinese Exclusionary Act, which banned all Chinese from entering the point. However, this was a flawed um, act because of the chain migration and the skilled labor force that was needed. Nonetheless, they prohibited immigrants. And then another organization that came about in strong opposition to the new immigrants and another nativist group was the Immigration Restriction League. The Immigration Restriction League was led by the wealthy class, and they had sought a literacy test on all immigrants. However, Grover Cleveland, serving his second term, vetoed it and called it illiberal, narrow, and un-American. Section 2, now we're taking a look at urban development. The changing of the city. Well, between 1865, again, coinciding with the second industrial revolution to the 1900s, cities will double in size. Most notably will be the cities in the Northeast, where we begin to see physical landscapes changed with the advent of the skyscrapers. You have elevators that get mechanical elevators that will get to high floors at a rapid pace from bottom floor to top floor. You'll see masonry walls. You'll see new heights, new windows, and less wall space to support into the building, and then we'll also see intensive urban land use. And with that, you'll see mass transit will come about. Mass transit will be electric commuter trains, subways, and trolley cars. Trolley car was a main transit that was most notably used in San Francisco and other trail locales or other trolleys in Richmond, Virginia. And with that, we see the growth of suburbs. These are residential neighborhoods in the outskirts of the city, so really they're not the suburbs that we're familiar with here, such as Woodbury, but these are suburbs that are just on the outskirts of the city, and oftentimes they're called first-ring suburbs. Within the suburbs, we see the wealthy residents, and the advantage was more space. They could have gardens, they could have rural pleasure, and again, more space meant higher social status. With the movement of mass transit to the new suburbs, we see the onset of the upper class. The upper class is going to be known as the nouveau riche. The nouveau riche comes from a French term meaning newly rich. This newly wealthy class were city dwellers. They made a public effort to display their wealth. Again, they wanted to demonstrate their social status, much superior than that of the middle class, upper middle class, and poor class. And with this came conspicuous consumption. That was excessive buying of material items to demonstrate that social status. And some of those material items were the Victorian culture items, such as lavished architectural design and also abundance of lavished materials. Then we have the middle class life. The middle class life increased in the late 1800s. It increased where we have now professional high-skilled jobs such as doctors, business owners, lawyers, teachers, and also other professions that grew in the late 1800s that came from corporate development, such as accountants, clerks, engineers, managers, and salespeople. However, the women were left out. And with the women left out, their way to respond was to take on more traditional roles, such as sales clerks, secretaries, or stenographers. But they also formed social groups, and these social groups were centered around book clubs, social clubs, that again will demonstrate their ability to continue to move for that equality and transformation piece equal to that of males. The poor class. The poor class lived in Tenement housing, which is poor, dilapidated buildings, usually around ports or stockyards where air pollution was prominent, poor ventilation, raw sewage, piles of garbage, and these neighborhoods were really um, occupied by families that are very large in size because the new immigrants brought many people that worked these factory jobs, and always the tenements were close to the factory jobs. The tenements um, living was the harshest on African Americans because they had the greatest difficulties because of discrimination and low paying jobs, and many couldn't get jobs. So that results in a drive for reform. The drive for reform, we see settlement houses. Settlement houses are reforming community services that help with poor neighborhoods. One of the keynote historical figures is Jane Addams, who, again, was the forefront of American settlement house movement in the 1860s. She came from a wealthy family and decided that she needed to turn around and help the poor communities, or the urban poor. We also see the Hull houses. The Hull houses are they're rundown mansions in the Chicago immigrant neighborhood, and the Hull houses are busy trying to transform the poor neighborhoods in Chicago. The goals of both um, Jane Addams and the Hull House were to provide education and cultural opportunities for the poor, and also improve living conditions. Mostly it was volunteered women that helped out in these um, settlement houses, and most of the women were young and college educated. The social gospel also emerges during this time. Um, the social gospel is led by Protestant ministers who joined the battle against poverty, and they also applied Christian principles to address social problems. They provided classes, counseling, job training, libraries, and other social services. Um, both Jane Addams and Hull Houses attempted to help the needy. Addams and Barrett responded by establishing settlement houses, and Barrett established a free public kindergarten. And Jane, did I put her on here? Oh yeah, Jane Barrett. Barrett, forgot to talk about her. Sorry, she's the first American settlement houses, and she helped set up kindergarten for the poor neighborhoods as well. All right, section 3: daily life in cities. Daily life in cities. First, we'll take a look at education. In the 1860s, compulsory education emerges, and this is going to be state mandates where they send children to schools from the 1860s to 1900s. In the compulsory education, we will see the growth of education from 7 million to 15 million students going to school. The expenditures from the state rose dramatically, and then during this time, with enrollment increasing, we have an educational pioneer named John Dewey, who starts the laboratory of school. Learning is by doing, emphasized history, science, and other core academic areas, where most urban schools, they were slow to apply these new teaching methods. Most core urban schools where the poor resided, they taught behavior, loyalty, and American cultural values. So we see a discrepancy of suburban schools and inner city schools, where inner city schools are taught just behavior and American values, where now in middle class neighborhoods, upper middle class, and wealthy class, they're taught core curricular areas. Emerges during this time publishing. And publishing, hold on, I forgot to mention one thing. College was only for the wealthy and middle class, and women were discouraged from going to college during this time as well. Colleges really expanded during this time. We see enrollment going from 50,000 to 350,000, but mainly comprised of the wealthy classes. Okay, on to publishing. Publishing, we see the rise of journalism. With the rise of journalism, we see an increase of literacy amongst Americans. With the increase of literacy, we see the demand of newspaper, Reader's Digest, and other magazines. Other publications, not necessarily what we'd call magazines, but paper publications emerged during this time. And with this comes the rise of William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst will be the innovator and writer for the New York Pulse, or New York Journal, sorry. He'll be a Pulitzer Prize winner. He will also develop a comic series known as The Yellow Kid, and really these are the first cartoons and depiction of a genre known as yellow journalism, where yellow journalism is going to be satirical comedy that embellishes the truth. And also during this time, we see literature rise with diamond nickel novels. Diamond nickel novels are going to be usually dramas or conflicts that center around the New York's nouveau riche and the upper middle class. And again, mostly consumed by the upper middle class, and wealthy class. With increase of industrialization, we see leisure time, and we also see growth in urban areas. With that, we have the City Beautiful movement, which is proposed by American Planning Movement, and it's the ideas of creating a beautiful city where you have public parks, attractive boulevards, and advantages for bicycling areas and croquet and other outdoor activities. And with leisure in urban areas came our first known American sports, the first being baseball. Um, the baseball emerges with in 1869, we see the first professional baseball team, the Cincinnati Red Sox, or Stockings. And then football will come later in the 1870s. In the late 1870s, the sports brutality led to discussions in Congress about outlawing football. Imagine how that ties into today. And then we also have basketball. That's invented by John Naismith. He was a physical education teacher in Massachusetts. He invented the game in 1891. We see entertainment. Entertainment in the late 1800s, people of every income level spent leisure time enjoying the theater and music. Edwin Booth, one of the most popular attractions in the 1860s and 70s. Oftentimes, when the poor went to movies, they attended plays that centered around the wealthy aristocrats as the enemy, while the heroes were the working class poor. Meanwhile, in the vaudevilles, this is a French word for light play, there was a variety show that features a wide selection of short performances, usually magicians, singers, and skits. Also during this time is the emergence of the music known as ragtime. Ragtime was popular, created by African American musician during the 1890s, and it was customary foot stomping and audiences listening to folk songs and ragtime pianists. And there were emergence of many popular dances during this time, such as the Maple Leaf Rag and other host dances such as the Cakewalk, the Grizzly Bear, and the Turkey Trot. Rapid urban growth brought many entertainment seekers into the U.S. cities. That will conclude this week's notes. Please again review the content objectives on the first slide, and good luck with week 3 of trimester 2.